On Saturday, February 3, 2018, a group of local officials were invited to Raleigh by Governor Roy Cooper to meet with U.S. Secretary of the Interior Ryan Zinke to register concerns about offshore drilling. Chairman Bob Woodard of the Dare County Board of Commissioners talked with Dare County Public Information Officer Dorothy Hester about the meeting.
Chairman Woodard, what prompted Governor Cooper to invite you to Raleigh to meet with Secretary Zinke?
A couple of weeks ago, late Thursday afternoon, I received a call from the governor's office to ask me if I was available that very Saturday to meet with the governor at the governor's mansion because Secretary of Interior Zinke from Trump's administration was in town to discuss the president's new 5-year plan for offshore oil and gas. And I said, absolutely. He invited me to be there at 10 o'clock Saturday morning with a panel of other folks, a couple of other representatives from our area, the Vice Mayor of Nags Head, Susie Walters, and certainly the Chairman of the CRC, Renee Cahoon. And so we traveled to Raleigh that Saturday, along with several other coastal county representatives from other counties, to have a frank conversation with Secretary Zinke with respect to our concerns about drilling offshore. And the Secretary was very informative. He listened. Some of the things that we asked him were, would he extend a period, 60 days for hearing, and would he certainly consider, based on the fact that they had exempted Florida, based on the fact that it would be harmful to their tourist industry, that we certainly asked the same thing. He listened. He understood our concerns, and he said it would take about a year or so through his process, that he was meeting with certainly the other coastal states from Maryland all the way to Florida, and that he would certainly listen to us. He understood that the Outer Banks was a tourist-driven economy, and he certainly was respectful of our concerns. And so we all shared that, and the governor hosted this, and I was grateful that the governor reached out to me and asked me to be a part of that. I didn't share the pros and cons with the secretary because I knew he knew those already, and I chose my comments to be what are some other alternatives, and I shared those alternatives with the secretary.
Are there negative effects for drilling on the East Coast?
There are numerous issues that we would face if this was to take place off our coast. Let me just preface it by saying that it's certainly not a political issue. There are 7 governors from the state of Maryland all the way to Florida. 4 of them are Republicans. 3 of them are Democrats. All 7 of those governors are highly opposed to offshore drilling off their coast because they're tourist destinations. And I want to make it perfectly clear that myself and the Board of Commissioners in Dare County, we want to have energy independence. Absolutely support that. We just feel like that there are other ways that you can accomplish this. With respects to the harmful damages, I can only cite that in the Outer Banks, we are a $1 billion tourism economy. We could not withstand a BP spill that occurred in 2010 off the coast, off the Gulf Coast. Today, 7 years later, they are experiencing very, very difficult times in getting the tourists to come back to the Gulf Coast. There was a spill of 134 million barrels of oil spilled in that spill. It took 87 days for them to cap that well. I'm not confident in today's world, just 7 years later, that we have the technology to cap these wells in a spill situation any quicker than they did back then. There are reports from the scientists that say of that 134 million barrels of oil that are spilled, there's approximately 30% of that is still either on the ocean floor or under the sands of the beaches of the Gulf Coast. There were trillions of oyster beds that were damaged, that have struggled to come back today. 3/4 of the pregnant bottlenose dolphin in the oil spill that occurred in the Gulf failed to give birth to what they say is a viable calf. In addition to that, between 2 and 3 trillion larva fish and 3 billion oysters are estimated to have been lost. And these are figures from the scientists that went out and did the studies. The fishing, wildlife, and habitat has suffered tremendously in the Gulf Coast because of it. There was $17.1 billion in in ecological damages to the coast. I'm told that the scientists have said that the mangroves that grow in the coast were totally destroyed, which the mangroves protects those individual islands in the coast, and those islands are going away. I'm told that the fish habitats from the scientists have said that they are struggling to recover. So just those things alone, right here on our coast of the Outer Banks, if any of that were to occur, we could not recover in 7 years. We would be a ghost town. We have over 300 restaurants from Hatteras all the way to Duck that the restaurant industry would suffer. Once again, we're a tourist destination. We have thousands of rental homes that generate that $1 billion economy each year, that we would not see that revenue come into the Outer Banks. And so with that said, that total devastation of one oil spill would completely shut the whole coast of the Outer Banks down. There are almost 300 miles of coastline just in the state of North Carolina. I am told, and this is from our parks, I know this for a fact, we have almost 130 miles of that 300 miles to be national park properties. The President and the Secretary of Interior's job and his being ahead of that Park Service and coming from a position that he held similar to look after the territories, that is a responsibility to protect the ecological system of the parks throughout all the states throughout the United States. So with 130 miles of our 300 miles being Park Service property, that would be a huge devastation if we would have an oil spill to damage those properties as well. So once again, it's not a political issue. It's all about our economy and protecting our livelihood.
Are there any alternatives?
As a matter of fact, the Secretary of Interior said that that the oil companies have moved onshore. They would prefer to do onshore. There are 10 major states that produce oil in the United States, Texas being the highest volume, and you got Oklahoma, you got North Dakota, you got the Balkans area with Montana, California. All of those states are producing the majority of the oil in this country. We have 141 refineries in the United States. Only 5 have been built in the last 7 or 8 years. There's only been 17 built in the last 23 years. So if you do the math, 17 from that 141, we have outdated refineries throughout the United States, and they're not pumping to the capacity that we need them to pump at. We can only refine a little over 16 billion barrels a day throughout the United States, and we're pumping a lot more oil than we can refine. We need, and I said this to the Secretary, that we need to ease the permitting process for drilling for oil onshore, and we need to ease the permitting process for building refineries. Those companies that have the refineries that are outdated are struggling now to maintain them, and they're doing major maintenance on those refineries. The United States of America has the largest oil shale deposits in the world. 2.175 billion barrels of oil just in those oil shale that's undiscovered, not undiscovered, but not even being drilled for. There's about, according to the last survey that was done by the government, there was about 115 billion barrels of oil that had not been discovered in the United States. 48 billion of those was in the Gulf, another 38 billion in the Arctic. There's only, according to the government's estimates, 17.1 billion off our coast of the Atlantic. There's 2 canyons. One's the Norfolk Canyon off of the Virginia Beach area. The Washington Canyon is off the Maryland coast. Both of these are 60 to 70 miles offshore. We've got 3 canyons off our coast, the Nag's Head, the Pamlico, and the Keller Canyons, all 60 to 70 miles off our coast. They're deep canyons. I like to use this analogy because we've just gone through some beach nourishment projects in our southern beaches and our northern beaches. There was a $40 million project for Kill Devil Hills, Kitty Hawk, duck, and southern shores. Approximately $6 to $7 million of that $40 million project was mobilization cost. Well, we're only 2.5 miles offshore, not in federal waters, and we're only off depth-wise of about 37 feet to suck sand off of a compatible borrow pit to put sand on our beaches. Now, if you do the math, I know for a fact that to build a platform that far offshore, 60 to 70 miles offshore, and to drill in those canyons, you've got to drill 6,000 feet plus. To me, I don't know what the numbers are, but I'm just relating them to a simple beach nourishment project. The mobilization cost has got to be phenomenal for these oil companies. And so certainly that would drive up the cost, as well as these oil companies, I believe, if they had the choice, would prefer to drill onshore. So those are the situations that we need to take advantage of, and not not put ourselves in harm's way when we know that there are resources on shore that have multiple reserves that they can drill for oil, rather than to take the chance on a much smaller amount of oil that they could get off our coast, and the risk is not worth the reward when it comes to that amount of damage that could be done off our coast. So those are the types of things that I mentioned to the Secretary. He was very attuned to that, listened to that. It made sense to him. So once again, I say, let's ease the permitting process to drill, and let's ease the permitting process to build new refineries, and let's do it on shore. And why take the chance? And I'll just say, in final, where we have drilled, we have spilled.